2022 Interim Joint Committee on Education. And we would also ask that each one of you silence your phone or put them on vibrate to avoid interruptions. I want to recognize Co-Chair Wise is here with me today. You have anything? Okay. And also I think that Representative Bojanowski has some guests she would like to introduce.
Yes, I'd like to welcome a group of parents who are here to advocate for reading instruction in Kentucky, and also a principal from JCPS, Shannon Conlon. So please welcome.
We will go ahead and get right into the agenda. Our first item is, we need to call the roll. I am so excited. I want to move this thing along. Mariah, if you will, please call the roll.
Senator Carroll, Senator Givens, Senator Harper Angel, Senator Higdon, Senator Kerr, Senator Meredith, Senator Neal, Senator Southworth, Senator Stivers, Senator Thomas, Senator West, Senator Wilson, here. Representative Baker,
here.
Representative Banta,
Here.
Representative Bojanowski,
Here.
Representative Decker, Representative Donahue,
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Dossett, Representative Hart,
Here.
Representative Lewis,
Here.
Representative Massey, Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative McCoy,
Here.
Representative Miller, Representative Gibbons Prunty, Representative Rayburn,
Here.
Representative Riley, Representative Scott, Representative Timoney,
Here.
Representative Tipton,
Here.
Representative Weber,
Here.
Representative Wilner, Co-Chair Wise,
Here.
Chair Huff.
Present. Thank you very much. Now we will go ahead with our agenda. First, our presenter will be Bo Barnes, and we will be discussing recent changes for rehiring retired teachers and how we are looking at that to offer more opportunities. And if you will, please make sure your microphone's on, Mr. Barnes. Thank you so much. And you may proceed.
Excuse me. Good morning. Bo Barnes. I serve as Deputy Executive Secretary and as General Counsel for the Teachers Retirement System, or TRS. And I've been asked today to discuss, as the Chair said, the provisions under which teachers may retire and return to work in the classroom. Okay? And among those provisions, I'm going to discuss what I'll call the permanent provisions. These are provisions that are set forth in statute and have been for years. So just for way of comparison to see what the permanent provisions are, I'll cover those. And I'll also be covering the temporary adjustments that have been made to those permanent provisions in non-codified language recently enacted by a series of bills over the last several months. Just as with, because TRS, our role, our mission here is to provide information and assist school districts, our employers, assist our members with all facets of the retirement system, including, importantly, return to work provisions. We have been proactive on these temporary adjustments from the legislation that's been enacted over the last several months with employers. We sent out memoranda explaining in detail what the temporary provisions did. With our members, we communicate with them on our website. We have a link that provides detail about what these temporary adjustments to the permanent return to work provisions do. We even have a video where a TRS counselor will walk them through these return to work provisions. And then also we had discussions with the Department of Education, KDE, as well as other education groups, helping everybody understand fully what these temporary adjustments do and that they are implemented by the member and the employer correctly. So with that, I will proceed with the next slide. So first, and we get a lot of questions about why, what these return to work provisions do. We get it from members and employers and others. And so first, I just want to, and this is important, I'll spend a little time here just explaining the background of why these return to work provisions exist, what they do. Well, first, they allow, again, the retired teacher to return to the classroom to help districts with school staffing needs, okay? And overwhelmingly, retired teachers are returning to work in substitute teaching positions as part-time employees. Very few return to work in full-time positions, and I have a slide a little later that will show that, and we'll discuss that. But overwhelmingly, they're going back as subs once they retire. These return to work provisions also accomplish two critically important goals in allowing these teachers to go back into the classroom. First, these critical return to work provisions are established to make sure it's actuarially sound, okay? And it does that a couple of ways. One, with a retirement system like TRS, it has a legacy unfunded liability. We're getting contributions on those retirees going back into the classroom, okay, that are coming into the retirement system. I do want to note here that with the budget that was just passed, that's going to mark the 8th straight year in a row that TRS has received full or almost very nearly full funding for the pension fund. And that's a tremendous thing that all teachers can be very appreciative and thankful for, that we're getting this full funding now. It's not just helping with our investment program, it is also allowing us to implement our funding plan to pay off that legacy unfunded liability. Paying it off like a home mortgage was over 30 years. We have less than 23 left. At which point, when we get to 100% funded, the cost for the Commonwealth in today's dollars will be a little less than Social Security. The cost the Commonwealth is struggling with is that legacy unfunded liability, or used to struggle with. We are now, again, fortunately getting full funding to address that legacy unfunded liability. So, in addition to getting contributions on these positions, we are also, there are other limitations. You do not want to make return to work too attractive to teachers. Teachers in our earliest tiers 1 through 3, we call them TRS 1, 2, and 3. We have a new tier, TRS 4, that just started this January 1st, okay? But for most of our teachers, they can retire at any age with 27 years of service. And you don't want to have all your retirement skewed to people who are retiring very young with just 27 years. That's not good for the system actuarially. So there are limits in place, or limitations in place. First, most of our teachers go back again in part-time positions as substitute teachers, overwhelmingly. It's not even close. But there is a limit. They can go back full-time too, and this was something new that started in 2002. And so there was a limit on the number of positions that districts could hire people in as full-time teachers. That limitation is that no more than 3% of the teachers working in a school district can be retirees. Now, no one touches that limit. No one's close to that limit. But if someone were to need to go above that limit, there's a provision in statute where they could borrow unused positions from across the state. And there are a whole lot of unused full-time positions across the state. So the second thing, and really more significantly, is that there's an earning limitations for retirees going back into the classroom. And again, you don't want to make this program, the ability to go back to work, too attractive, where you incentivize people to retire as soon as they get 27 years. Of course, for a teacher, graduate from college at age 22, they can retire at age 49. Very few people do that. Less than 5% of our retirees are under the age of 50. We have more retirees 60 and over than we do under 50. And part of that is this return to work program and other things we've done to encourage longevity in teaching in the classroom. So the earnings limitation works like this. For our retirees who retire with 30 or more years of service, they can go back in the classroom at 75% of their last annual compensation, measured on a pro rata daily rate. We call it the daily wage threshold. And for our teachers who retire with less than 30 years of service, they can retire at 65% of their last annual compensation. And this is what I kind of call our standard return to work program. I'm describing the 3% limit and the daily wage threshold, the earnings limitation. There's another program that's even less used. I'm going to talk about a few slides later called the Critical Shortage Program, where there is no earnings limitation. But so I'm talking about our standard program. By far, it's the most common used program. I mean, this is the way that districts are hiring teachers to come back in the classroom, the standard program, not the critical shortage program. And you can really, with critical shortage and other things that we do, and given time, I won't go into all the things that we do to encourage longevity in the classroom, but you can really change retirement patterns, and it's obvious. Before 2002, and teachers could retire with 27 years, go back in the classroom, work 100 days maximum, and be paid full salary. So they could get their pension and full salary before 2002. And what we were seeing was that was very attractive for teachers because they could go back in the classroom, retire, go back in the classroom, earn almost 120% of what they were making before, and work 100 days instead of 185 days. So I was with the system before 2002, and we got a call from the Educational Professional Standards Board, and they wanted some data. They wanted to see over the last several years how many teachers were retiring with exactly 27 years of service and gone. And what we found was alarming. It was alarming for us actuarially because we were trending to really low retirement ages because it was too attractive to retire and go back to work. So for actuarially, it was alarming to us. And for the Educational Professional Standards Board, it was alarming to them because they saw that we were seeing exponential increase in the number of people retiring with just 27 years of service to go back for 100 days. And it was alarming for them because they could see we were trading full-time active teachers, unretired teachers, for part-time retired teachers. So that's when this 2002 legislation came about that put in, for example, this daily wage threshold, earnings limitation. Also, breaks in service were required for the first time. I mean, a break from retirement before you could return to the classroom. I'll discuss that again here. It's also important for the bottom point I'm going to make here on this slide. So that changed everything. Instead of seeing the exponential growth in 27 and out, we started seeing it level out. And we're seeing level retirement patterns now as a result of that 2002 legislation and other things, which, again, for time, I won't go into detail today, but glad to any other time, have helped, keep retirements now where the average age for all our members is about 59 with 30 years of service. Okay, big turnaround. Bottom of the slide, the other critical goal that we have to have if we retire and return to work is make sure that we are complying with federal tax law, okay? And there are a lot of rules to comply with federal tax law. And by that, and why we want to comply with federal tax law is because we're a qualified plan under Section 401A of the Internal Revenue Code. And that qualification means that teachers can make contributions to TRS on a tax-deferred basis, which more take-home pay in their paycheck. So obviously a very important tax advantage that you want to preserve, and we spend a lot of time and effort making sure that we preserve that qualified tax status. And again, there are a lot of rules that we have to follow. There's a lot of things that we do to make sure we're complying, and we're constantly evaluating and making sure we're complying with federal tax law. One of the things, the most important things about a retirement plan to be compliant with federal tax law is it cannot be a plan that allows members to start receiving their retirement benefits, any plan, public, private, before they've retired. Okay, they cannot have you can't have a plan designed to allow in-service distributions. They have to have what the IRS would call a bona fide retirement before they start receiving, before they can go back, to the classroom or any other employment for other employees. And they haven't really told us what constitutes a bona fide retirement. Been a little vague, with one exception. And they have said, without qualification, that if there's a pre-arranged agreement for a retiring employee and the employer for that retiring employee to come back to work after retirement, that is automatically not a bona fide retirement. So our return to work statutes that we have for TRS, we have a provision in there. There can be no prearranged agreement, which mirrors what federal law would require, but we have it in the state statute as well. And we also have something else that we do. And most public pension plans do this. Most public pension plans do have limitations on returning to work because of what I've discussed. But a lot of public pension plans, and the IRS has never spoken to this, but public pension plans adopt a separation in service requirement from retirement to returning back to work. The IRS has not said that that means it's a bona fide retirement if there's a break between retirement and returning to work. They have, much less have they said X number of months will make it a bona fide retirement. They haven't spoken to that. Really, it's an all facts and circumstances review by the Internal Revenue Service. And so these breaks in service that we have and the other public pension plans and private pension plans have, that it helps demonstrate under that all facts and circumstances analysis that, yeah, this looks like this really was, they were retiring, they were gone, and then they decided to come back. There was not a prearranged agreement. So that's why we have that in there. And this is all very important, for two reasons. One, we want to be able to show the IRS that we're not a plan that allows in-service distributions. Therefore, we risk disqualification, and teachers' retirement contributions get taxed again like they used to be, And then also, it's bad for the individual if the IRS were to audit them and find out that they did not have a bona fide retirement. That would subject them to substantial tax penalties, and even potentially extreme penalties like finding the retirement's void, with serious consequences if that were to happen. So that's why these return to work provisions are there. This is what they do, and this is what they accomplish. Go on to the next page. So first I'm going to tell you what the permanent statutory rules are before they were temporarily adjusted with this non-codified language in this recent legislation over the last several months. And on this, and again, we're calling these the permanent rules because they are in statute. On the left, you'll see the description of the program we're talking about, the return to work program, and on the right, just a description of what those permanent rules are. So we'll start at the top. You'll see for the part-time return to work program, if you're going back to work part-time, you have a 3-month break in service, okay, from retirement until you can go back in the classroom. Most of our teachers go in part-time, and there's a limitation of you cannot work 70% or more of the school year if you're going back part-time. If you're going back full-time, again, there's that 3% limitation doesn't really come into play, but there's also a requirement there's no other qualified applicant, and you have to hire that retired teacher. And then also there are those wage limits I talked about on the previous slide, the daily wage threshold that they're subjected to, even going back part-time. Their income is limited, their earnings are limited. Then also we have the full-time program. They can go back to under work, and again, I kind of call this our standard program, the standard with the earnings limitations. They can go back to work full-time, and some do, and I'll talk about that more later. But they go back full-time. They have to have a 12-month break in service if going back to work for the same school district. And they have to have a 3-month break in service if they're going to work for a different school district. And they are still subject to those earnings limitations, okay, the 75% or 65% of last annual compensation. But there's also something called the Critical Shortage Program. It's very limited, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but that allows them to go back and earn any salary the district wants to pay them, okay? And in that, you have the 3-month break in service going back part-time. You have day limits. If you're going in part-time, you can't work 70% or more of the school year. And you can go back full-time in the Critical Shortage Program. And again, same breaks in service, 12 months if you're going back to the same school district, 3 months if you're going back to a different school district. And this is completely the employer's discretion. The school district is not required to hire people in a critical shortage. They're not even required, of course, to hire retirees back in the standard program. That's completely within the discretion of the school district. So I'm going to talk about now the legislation that provided non-codified language that temporarily adjusted these permanent statutory provisions that I just talked about. And this started back in September with last year's special session, and schools were reporting staffing issues, and there was concern by the General Assembly to try to do different things, various things to help the districts with shortages. So in that non-codified language, of course, they provided for a relaxation, temporary relaxation of some of those return to work rules that I just talked about. The dropping of the breaks in service. And there's some other things I'm going to talk about the Critical Shortage Program in a little bit. But anyway, that bill, Senate Bill 1, enacted last September, it was going to sunset. It was set to sunset January 15th of this year. Okay, so it was a narrow window for teachers to take advantage of, for example, this 1 month break in service versus, I'm going to talk about in a minute, versus the longer ones. And then all the permanent statutory provisions, all those would revert back just the way they were. Significantly, Senate Bill 1 provided that only teachers who had retired on or before August 1st could take advantage of this temporary relaxation of the return to work provisions, okay? So since it was a September special session, obviously that means that only teachers who had already retired could take advantage of this temporary relaxation of the return to work rules. No one active could. Again, more detail on this later. Then we fast forward to the regular session, the 2022 regular session. We had Senate Bill 25, and there was some concern that, Senate Bill 1 from the special session was going to sunset January 15th, and, we wanted to allow districts to continue to use these relaxed return to work provisions a little bit longer. So Senate Bill 25 basically did two things. One, it extended those same relaxed return to work provisions that Senate Bill 1 had through the end of the year to June 30th. Okay, and then also it extended those provisions not just to teachers going back in certified teaching positions, but also to retired teachers who want to go back in classified positions. For example, a CER's County Employees Retirement System position, like a bus driver. There was apparently a need for bus drivers, and some retired teachers were willing to go back as bus drivers. So it expanded a little bit by allowing a little more flexibility for the districts. And then we get to House Bill 1. This is the third and final piece of legislation, enacted again, of course, in the 22 regular session, that it's the third and final piece of legislation that provided temporary adjustment to the return to work provisions. And based on the previous temporary relaxation of the provisions that we had, applies only to TRS retirees going back into the school districts. Okay, the previous legislation also had companion provisions for county employees retirement system. This was just focused on TRS, school districts, TRS retirees. And it extended the sunset provision from Senate Bill 25's June 30th to June 30th, 2024. So it expanded it another 2 years. Okay, now who is eligible for this House Bill 1 relaxed return to work provisions? Again, TRS retirees returning to work for a school district in a certified or classified position, and on or after the effective date of that House Bill 1, which was so that after April 12th, if they come back, and if they retire and they come back before July 1st, 2024. Then they get to take advantage of these relaxed return to work provisions. And once they do that, if they come back to work, they get these relaxed provisions for the rest of their tenure, the rest of their career. They don't have to go back to the old permanent return to work provisions. One way House Bill 1 was different from the previous two pieces of legislation is, I noted the previous two pieces of legislation only applied to teachers who retired on or before August 1st of 2021. That House Bill 1 did not have that provision. So it applied not only to retired teachers, but to also active teachers who will be active this year and the next 2 years. And I also need to point out here, because House Bill 1 is for TRS only, this is very important. We do have members who have what we call reciprocity service. They have service in TRS, and they have service in, for example, CERS. But if they have service in both systems, and this is what we're communicating to our members, they need to make sure they are adhering to the breaks in service in all retirement systems in which they have service, not just TRS. That's only for our reciprocity retirees. Okay, what are the temporary changes? So let's get into that. And again, on the left-hand side, we have a description of the program. In the middle, we have what the permanent rules were for comparison, which I won't go over because I already have. And then on the right-hand side, we have what the temporary changes are now, currently. And so we'll top line, just like before, the part-time standard program, that 3-month break has gone down to 1-month break if it's a TRS retiree going into a school district position, certified or classified. Full-time, instead of 3 or 12 months, it's 1 month. Critical shortage, part-time, 1 month. And critical shortage, full-time, 1 month also. And I'll talk about this in the next slide too, but there's also a limitation on the number of critical shortage programs that districts can hire retired teachers into. Those limits were increased, and I'll talk about that in the coming slides. And again, very importantly, breaks in service for reciprocity retirees must be observed for each system in which they have service. The other thing that this did, House Bill 1, and the previous two pieces of legislation, Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 25 did, is it increased the number of critical shortage program positions from 1%, or each district gets a minimum of 2 critical shortage positions, because for some districts 1% is less than 2 positions. So each district gets at least 2 critical shortage positions, or 1%. So it increased that 1% to 10%. Okay. And in these critical shortage positions, again, the district can pay that retiree anything they want to. And it's discretionary, of course, with the district. So here's just some data on the critical shortage program, how the temporary changes are used. And I'm going to focus first on these gray boxes at the top of this slide. And on the left, you'll see the tag permanent program. That permanent program, that means that's actually the permanent statutory program that existed before we had these 3 pieces of legislation. It's a snapshot of where we were as of September 8th, 2021. And at that point in time, statewide, there were 622 critical shortage positions available statewide. Of those, 34 positions were being used by the school districts for 5.47% of the positions being used. Just beneath that, the temporary program, this is where we are now with those temporary changes enacted in non-codified language in House Bill 1. There are now 5,423 critical shortage positions available statewide. 178 of those are being used, or 3.28% of the available positions are being used by districts. Those numbers are as of June 3rd of this year, so those are very recent numbers. And then the gray box below that, we have 172 school districts. 125 do not use the critical shortage program. So 73% of our school districts are not using the critical shortage program. And of those that are, 6 are using more critical shortage positions than what was allowed before we had these temporary adjustments, the world we had on September 8th of 2021. 6 are going above that. And that's for a total of 21 positions that they are using in excess of what would have been allowed under the permanent statutory provisions. And then also, again, I said earlier that most of our retirees are going back as substitute teachers overwhelmingly. There are, and I talked about that 3% cap for the standard retire return to work program. That allows 1,638 full-time positions statewide, which districts could hire folks back in subject to those wage limitations. And 175 retirees are being hired as full-time in those positions. So about 11% of the positions were being used as of June this year. Again, these temporary changes that were in House Bill 1 are set to sunset on June 30th, 2024. And again, if a member gets a 1-month break in service, goes back to work, gets a 1-month break in service before June 30th, 2024, they're good. After June 30th, 2024, they don't have to go back and pick up an additional 3 or 12 months. What does not change? And we get this question a lot. And there's a lot of misunderstanding. We get a lot of questions at TRS from districts and members. Very importantly, again, there can be no pre-arranged agreement between the school district and the retiring teacher for that retiring teacher to come back to work in any position, whether it's certified or a classified position. Going back to the school district period, there can be no pre-arranged agreement. A lot of people are confused and they think there's not any limitation anywhere on earnings. But the standard return to work program still has those earnings limitations of 75% or 65% of last annual compensation. Again, reciprocity, retirees, as always, must meet the break in service for each system. So if somebody has service in CERS, we tell them to call CERS, check with them, make sure you meet their break in service. You don't want your retirement voided. And then also, when retirees go back to work, if they have health insurance available through their new active employer, they are required to drop their TRS health insurance, pick it up with their active employer, like a school district, and then when they retire again, then they would pick up the TRS health insurance. This is just a page showing, some of our links that we have on our website. They provide the detail and explain to our employers and our members what the temporary and permanent return to work provisions are. And then I'm going to conclude with one last slide, and this is just some data that I was asked to provide. I'm going to flesh this out a little bit. This is a snapshot of what we would have as of June 30th, 2022, with the data that we have now. We have 73,198 members. This is everybody. Okay, I'm going to break this down for you, but this includes our universities, which are probably about 4 to 5% of our total member population, and other employers. And of those 73,198, 8,890 are eligible to retire today, about 12.15%. Now, if we're just to break this down, to school districts, we have 68,620 members. And of those, 7,700 are eligible to retire, or about 11.22% are eligible to retire. Now, that does not mean that all 7,700 of our school district employees are going to retire, because a lot of these, in fact, 3,100 of that 7,700, if they retired now, they would be considered early retirement and subject to an actuarial discount of their retirement allowance. So most of these folks are going to hang around and eliminate those actuarial discounts and make sure, and we have other things we do too, which again, if I had more time, I would explain other things we do to incentivize teachers to hang around longer. That will keep a lot of these folks teaching longer and not have them retire as soon as they can. And we have about 2,000 retirements every year. Again, that number includes everybody. It's the university too, but it's mostly going to be school district employees, about 2,000. And that's been pretty steady since 2002, since these return to work provisions were changed. And that concludes the items that I was asked to speak about this morning. I'd be more than happy to take any questions from this committee, if there are any.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing this data with us and clarifying. I have had a lot of contacts from retirees that are, and it is confusing, so I understand. So I'll be glad to have this to guide me in answering some of those questions. Just real quickly, I wanted to ask you, have you seen a measurable shift or measurable amount that are leaving the profession or taking leaves to join other careers? Do you have any data?
I don't know that we're really seeing that. I think we're staying pretty steady with that. We're seeing, steady retirements. We're seeing, pretty steady numbers in new members, new teachers coming into the classroom. 2021 was an exception. Pandemic year, we definitely saw a decline in new teachers coming into the classroom. But this year, we're seeing an uptick, I think, to reflect that there was that decline in the previous year. 2022 is a stronger year for having new members in the classroom, new teachers in the classroom. So things are holding pretty steady as far as that goes from what we're seeing.
Thank you. I think Representative Donahue has a question.
Thank you. Thank you both for the presentation. On bullet point on page 6, the last bullet point there about retirees, having to drop their health insurance through TRS and then go with the other program they go into. And are you anticipating any problems? And if you are, is there some kind of support group that can help make those transitional periods? I just know in the previous place I worked before, we had a support group there because, when you're changing insurance stuff, we don't want anybody to fall through the cracks. Thank you.
Right. Yes. No. Certainly. And we that's part of our communication to members of the insurance side, because it is important. Contact us when you're planning on coming back on TRS insurance to make sure that we can get you on. And we have an insurance staff there that are available, by phone, by video, or in-person meeting that they can come in and discuss with them. And we encourage them to do so well before they make plans to end their reemployment and come back on TRS insurance.
Thank you both. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bo, I'm behind the camera.
Oh, okay. See.
But we talk a lot in PPOB and about, and you brought up the money that we paid since 2016. We made all of our actuarially required contributions, and then some. And we also talk a lot about sick days, and the $900 million unfunded liability, $538 million for current employees, current teachers, and the $375 million for retirees. I guess the point want you to we didn't talk about was we talk about money going into the retirement system. We paid off those green box dollars, which is, as we always talk about, it's clear as mud what's in there. But it's the COLAs that I think some of them go back as far as 2002, and sick days that we've been paying on for years. But we paid that off this time in a lump sum to the, I think, tune of like $479 million. Is that correct?
For the sick leave, no COLAs, yes.
Okay. And of course, that gives you a lot of, when you get that money after July 1, that gives you a lot of money to invest in the stock market now that it's on sale.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Bo.
Again, thank you very much
Okay.
for providing us
Thank you.
this vital information. I know that some people are concerned that they're going to have problems later, so they're kind of leery about going back. So hopefully we can get that cleared up to where they'll have an understanding that we have everything in place that needs to be in place for them to return.
Well, thank you. We're certainly there to help, and we encourage them to reach out to us before they make those kind of decisions, and we'll do all we can. We'll make sure that they get back under the laws as they exist. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Next, we have a presentation on teacher shortages, recruitment, and retention. If Dr. Glass come to the table as guest, please introduce yourselves for the record, and you may proceed. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's a delight to see all of you and to talk about this important topic. I'm going to be joined by a few folks. I'll walk you through our presentation, and we hope that we can just have a conversation with you during that and after it. Madam Chair, it may strain the limits of what parliamentary procedure allows, but we really hope that it will lead us to an engaging conversation. I'm joined by Brian Perry, who's our Director of Governmental Relations. This is Dr. Byron Darnell, who works in he's the Associate Commissioner over the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness and runs our teacher licensure programs. And we have Veda Stewart with us, who may join if there are questions around the Go Teach program that I'll talk about a little bit also. But I'm really grateful that we have some time with you to talk about this very important issue, and we're delighted that you've taken some time to allow us to present on it. Before we begin, what I'd like you to do is think about a great teacher that you had in your life, a teacher who had an impact on you, or maybe even a teacher that's in your community who is doing great things with the children and students that are in your community. So just take about 15 seconds and reflect on that person. Think about their name and what made them a great teacher. Thank you. And here is where we'll maybe strain at parliamentary procedure. I wonder if you could, someone who's sitting near you, tell them about that person. Who is that teacher? What made them a great teacher? And I'm going to ask a few of you to share out those teachers and their names. Take about one more minute. About 10 more seconds. Thank you. And I wonder, Madam Chair, if you could assist me with this, if some of the members of the committee might be willing to share some of those teachers' names and some of the qualities that made them great teachers.
I'm sure that we have people that love to share here on this committee. They would talk to wouldn't need anybody that could listen to them. They
Right.
love. So yes, Representative Bojanowski, she will share.
Yeah, that was me. She was specifically talking about me. So my favorite teacher, his name was Ray Four. It was in 7th grade at J-Town High School. And my mom had moved me out of TV math. We had TV math at that time, if anyone remembers that. And he signed his name with a Ray and a 4, which I thought was really cool. And for some reason, my parents were getting divorced then. And for some reason, he may have known that I needed a little extra without ever saying it. And from that day forward, I've had a love of learning math.
Thank you.
Representative Massey will share.
Well, I'm sorry for being late. I would listen to the prior presenter on the way in, but certainly my involvement with education has been most of my life, and having daughters that were engaged in that are engaged in teaching, and parents, I will tell you that the impact of teaching is huge. But the biggest thing to me about quality teaching is that there's a disposition towards love and affection for the children, and making sure that all children have the ability to succeed.
Representative Lewis will share.
Is this your hit list from the session? Or?
You say I never allow you to speak, so I'm just
Well, you
letting
never
you
allow me to
speak.
speak when I want to speak, was the issue.
Oh, well, that doesn't happen.
Well, actually, mine was a college professor at Lindsey Wilson College. Her name was Helen Flatt. And she said to me one day, she said, "Boy, you got some ability, but you need to apply it." And I still remember that to this day. She actually steered me toward education because I was a business major at the time. So that would be Miss Helen Flatt, Lindsey Wilson College. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like me to call out any other people that would like to share? Because I will.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing those names and bringing those people into the room that have had such an incredible impact on some of you and other students that grew up in your communities and had such an impact on your communities. So I'll ask if anyone else wants to bring a teacher into the room, into the conversation with us. Otherwise, we can move forward, Madam Chair.
Please proceed.
Okay,
I guess
thank
they're
you.
finished sharing today.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I asked you to do that, and I appreciate you taking the time to, really because I think it's important that we have in mind what a professional teacher can do and what exceptional teaching looks like and the impact that it can have. So when we think about supporting the teaching profession and making sure that we have great teachers in Kentucky, we want more people like the very ones that you thought about, the names that you had in mind, the people that had an impact on you or had an impact on your communities. We need more people like that to enter the teaching profession and to remain in the teaching profession. So just as we move forward, I'd ask that you keep that great teacher in mind and think about how can we get more people like that working in this profession. We thought that it might be a good place to start to just look at some of the data that we have on teaching and the status of the profession right now. And one important data point that we look at is around retention, or how many teachers we hang on to from year to year. And we often measure retention by looking at its opposite, or turnover. Turnover is simply the number of professionals that we lose each year for any number of reasons. And as turnover increases, so does the pressure to get more people into the teaching profession at the front end. So what you see here is our most recent teacher turnover data from the 2020-21 Kentucky School Report Card. And you can see that the last percentage that we have is it should be 16.2%. So there's an error in that. It's 16.2%. But on average, going back to the 2017-18 school year, Kentucky's teacher turnover has averaged around 17%. We see it here this last year, it was 16.2, but this was a COVID-impacted year, and Bo talked a lot about the data that we got out of the COVID-impacted years is strange. So we should put an asterisk and take a note of caution as we interpret that. But if we look at the last non-COVID impacted year, the teacher turnover in the state was 18.6, again trending ahead of the national average. So comparatively, Kentucky is right around where other states are, or a little worse where compared to other states in terms of teacher turnover. Next slide, please. So another data point to look at is, in addition to turnover, is job openings. And the chart that you see here shows the total number of job postings, and that's the top line over time, and the number of positions filled. So that's the bottom line between 2015-16 and 21-22. And this comes from the Kentucky Employment Placement System, or the KEP system. It's the same data that we use to report our critical shortage areas to the U.S. Department of Education. And over this time period, the number of position postings has increased. You again see a COVID impact in 2020 there, and some impact as we recover from that of the infusion of federal dollars, one-time federal COVID support dollars that flowed into districts. Of note, the percentage of filled positions has remained relatively constant. So that's the gap between those two bars, despite other fluctuations from year to year. So on average, about 83.5% of postings were filled. This demonstrates that while we're experiencing an increase in the number of positions, for the latest data that's available, that gap between postings and filled has remained fairly constant. Another way to look at how our workforce is doing is to look at the number of initial certifications that are issued. So here you see the number of total first-time credentialed issued, and that's the top line, and the shortage areas in the state, that's the bottom line. And our shortage areas are science, math, early childhood education, special education, world languages. There shouldn't be any surprises in that list, and that's the bottom line. And so as you can see, there's a great deal of variation in the number of new certifications that are issued each year, even though the state may be experiencing an increase in the number of first-time credentials right now, we still lag behind some other previous years. And we know that this is a national trend as well. We're seeing fewer individuals entering teacher education programs or entering the teaching professions, and we've experienced that in our teacher education programs here in Kentucky as well. One notable exception, and I just got a message from Dr. Vasquez Heilig at the University of Kentucky. He has been able to increase the number of people that are entering the teacher education program at UK, so I think there's something that we can learn from what's happening at UK, and can we replicate that? Although he does say that he has a hard time, even if they finish the program, getting them to make that transition into taking teaching jobs in Kentucky. So I think there's something that we can learn about that. Of concern, we're only seeing a slight increase in credentials in these, go back to that previous slide. Slight increase in the number of teachers entering into those identified shortage areas. So we're not producing enough licensed teachers in the areas that we need the most. Another way to think about this or look at it is around the total number of emergency certifications that are issued. So if we think back at the data that you had previously, that gap between postings and then filled, and then looking at the number of certifications that are issued. When you've got a position and you can't find a properly certified person to fill that, you go for an emergency certification to fill that gap. So this graph shows the number of emergency certifications that are issued, excluding emergency substitutes. So we go from 2015-16 to 2021-22, and the number above each individual bar shows the number of emergency certifications that were issued in that year. So again, you've got a pandemic impact where we had that year, and then it came right back, and you can almost see draw a line across the top of those and see the trend that's happening in terms of emergency certifications. So this is a clear indication that we've got a problem with the educator workforce in Kentucky. We're seeing an increased reliance on emergency certifications to fill the need for educators, and these certifications are issued with a lower standard of quality than the traditional license or an alternative alternative license that's issued through an accredited university program. Another piece of data that we wanted to share with you, and I have to talk through this one a little bit because it may be a little complex, but we're interested in sort of what are the numbers of teachers that we have in the state that are at risk of leaving the profession. Because we hear a lot about that there's going to be an exodus of teachers, or perhaps that's happening right now. We really don't have enough data to say whether that's true or not yet. But we did want to look at are we at risk? And Bo talked about this some in looking at the number of teachers that are eligible for retirement, and that's an important group. So you see that greater than 25 years of service, that has some overlap with the group that Bo was talking about. So those folks, if they wanted to, could hang it up and walk away. They're to a point where they could retire from teaching, have an income, and keep going. Another group that is at risk of leaving are teachers that are in their first 5 years, particularly in their first 3 years. We know that there's a lot of churn and turnover at the beginning of the teaching profession. And so we've got a great number of teachers that are in those first 5 years. And then we looked at this other group, this return to work. These are people who've had a break in service of some kind and have come back into the teaching profession. And that's also a group that we see higher comparative turnover with. So if you look at all that together, less than 5 years of service, greater than 25 years of service, and the return to work group, we get this 30,000 number. So that shows us that about 72% of the full number of FTE teachers in the state, which is the 42,000, about 72%, we would say is at some risk of leaving the profession, either that they can financially or they're in a group of teachers that historically shows a trend of being more likely to leave the profession. And this slide is around pathways into the teaching profession. So we're looking at those that are coming in through alternative pathways that are coming in either option 7, 8, 9, or the option 6 program is the black bar that's at the bottom. That's a university-based alternative education program. And then the number, the blue bar that you see on the graph is the number of teachers that are coming in through our traditional education programs. So the point of this is to say that Kentucky has added a number of different alternative pathways into teaching over the years, and those are important. We're able to supplement talent, bring in people who normally might not consider teaching into the teaching profession by using alternative pathways. So I'm a fan of alternative pathways. I think they can solve an incredible need that we have. But if you consider what's the main flywheel of producing teachers in the state, it's your traditional program. The traditional program is producing over 80% of the teachers in the state. They're coming through a traditional teacher education program. We have seen an increase in the number that are coming through the university-based alternative program. So that's about 20%, and that number has been growing. But the other pathways, the other alternative programs really account for a tiny fraction of the number of teachers that you have in the state. So we present this data to you really to say if you want to have an impact on teachers coming into the profession, the biggest places you can do that in terms of just the numbers that we see are in the traditional education program or in the university-based alternative program. I'm sorry, on that previous slide, just as a point of comparison, option 2, so you see here we had in the last year 1,912 coming through the traditional program, 507 coming through the university-based alternative program, 4 come through Teach for America. Option 2 had 8 completers, option 7 had 1 completer, option 8 had 49 completers. So again, comparatively, the traditional pathway and the university-based alternative were where most of the teachers were produced. So now we'd like to shift to some potential solutions or some ideas for you. And we'd like you to think about this in terms of being audacious, comprehensive, and transformative, because really the state has the ability to impact this in a way that an individual school district simply can't, or any university on its own can't. So the state, we have the capacity to have a big impact here. And what we'd like to present to you are just a list of ideas. They build on some existing models and programs that we have that we think if we added some more horsepower to those programs, we could have an impact. Or there's some new ideas here. So we hope that you walk away from this and drive home just thinking about some of the things that you've heard about, and consider possible legislation that may add some of these. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, was there a question? You're okay? Okay. Thank you. Okay. All right, so we'll look first at the Go Teach KY model. So that is the state's effort to bring teachers into the profession, support the teachers that we have, and make sure that those teachers are equitably distributed across the state. So every student in Kentucky has access to a high-quality teacher. And you see the components of the Go Teach KY model that range from recruitment, preparation, induction, retention, and then those grow your own programs that are in community. So this is an existing program that we have. It was started under Commissioner Lewis a few years ago. I think it contains all of the elements of a human capital system that we would want to be looking at. And I'd like to go into each of these areas with you and just present, again, some ideas for you to think about. So if we think about this sort of human capital pipeline, or what are the points in the pipeline that we could make an impact, we could think about encouraging early entry. How do we get more young people interested in the teaching profession? We could think about elevating the teaching profession across the state, raising the prestige and how teaching is considered around the state so that it's considered a desirable profession. Engage in actionable supports. What are some things that we could do right now in districts that would help us address the problem? Employ strategies to certification. We know that moving from getting trained to be a teacher to getting the certificate, there can be some barriers with that. What are some actions that we can take there? And what are some things that we could do to entice our teachers to stay in the profession? So those are some of the elements that I'll cover briefly with you here. So encouraging early entry. So you see these are some students that are in our Educators Rising program. So these are high school students that have identified teaching as a career path that they're interested in. One of the biggest things that we can do is encourage our own high school students to consider teaching as a future profession. Here we're talking about building up the teacher pathways in our high schools, similar to what we do with career technical education. So we're talking about a sort of CTE model applied to education. Educators Rising is one program that does that. So some things that we could do both in the short term and in the long term is increase access to the teaching and learning pathways for all students in Kentucky. Some of our high schools are running these career technical education models for the teaching profession. Some of them are not. So provide supports and resources around making sure that every one of our high schools has that option. And we could also look at, for those high school students that enter into the Educators Rising program, again, they've identified education as a future career path for them, scholarships that are associated with either dual credit or credits that they may get at a community college or technical college, or going right into one of our teacher education programs in the state. So that's an idea that you could consider. And longer term, think about expanding grant opportunities for districts to establish these programs in every community in Kentucky. One of the things that we see in how districts get educators who will stay in that community is they find someone who grew up in that town or that county. That person becomes a teacher and then comes back to that community and continues to serve there. That's a very common model that we see, especially in rural Kentucky. Thanks. We also want to elevate the teaching profession, get out some of the facts and the realities about what this is like. Teaching a career teaching is like. It has some wonderful positives and benefits, and there are certainly some tolls, and we should be honest about those. I think that teaching has been under a lot of scrutiny and criticism for a number of years, and that honestly is hurting us when it comes to recruiting teachers into the profession. So we can intentionally take efforts to lift up the teaching profession, make people aware of what life as a teacher might be like. Teachers go into this field for altruistic reasons for the most part. They want to serve their communities. They want to work with young people. They want to be connected to the future. But they also want a professional and livable wage. They want to have access to a middle-class life, and they want to retire with dignity. So we need to attract people into the teaching profession who are willing to devote the years the years that it takes of their lives to master the art and science of teaching. I would expect that many of the great teachers that you thought about when I asked you, think about a great teacher that you had or a great community, a great teacher in your community. It's someone that devoted those years of their life to mastering the art and science of teaching. This is not a job everyone can or should do. In the short term, some things that we could think about is increase an investment in the Go Teach KY marketing program. So we've got, again, an effort to do this, raise up the status of the teaching profession, make our communities more aware of the importance of teaching and what a life as a teacher might be like. But it's under horsepowered. We need a comprehensive effort to lift up the teaching profession in the state. And then also, if we look at all of those elements of the Go Teach KY model, all of them present opportunities for really, at the state level, modest investments could have an impact on our ability to recruit and retain teachers in the state. When it comes to these actionable resources, our districts right now are struggling with how do I get teachers in today? What are some things that we could do? So we have some ideas around that. Thanks. So the first of those is support the identification of a district recruitment and retention coordinator. So you could do this by requiring it. You could also provide a stipend or matching funds to support a district making sure that they have that person. Most of our districts that are working on recruiting and retention have someone who's serving in this role, but some specialization around that and support around that I think would go a long way. Provide dedicated funds to alleviate teacher recruitment barriers. So these might be things like signing bonuses, relocation funds to help people attract people into some communities that are struggling. Again, modest investments at the state level that may have a big impact on some of our communities that are really struggling to get teachers. And then support the development of recruitment and retention plans for districts. We know that districts have a number of plans that they put together. One of them would be the trauma-informed plans that were part of the School Safety and Resiliency Act. So similar to that, we could ask districts to put together recruitment and retention plans, and then at the state provide supports for best practices. Here are some ideas that we've seen be effective in Kentucky for districts meeting this need. We know that there are challenges with teachers moving from the training, pedagogical training, content training, and then getting the certificate. So we have some ideas on some things that we could do as a state that would support that transition. So one of those is accelerate the existing mentoring and reimbursement programs for teacher licensure exams. Our teacher candidates do have access to a mentor who can support them in going through the licensure exam. What are some things that they'll be assessed on and building up their skills with that. And we have teachers who struggle, especially if they have to take the praxis exam multiple times, with the costs associated with that. So sometimes they'll give up because they feel like they can't do it, or they'll feel like they don't have the resources to complete the praxis exam and finish. So that's an area where I think we could again make a modest investment and potentially have a big impact. Longer term, we could reduce the burden on candidates with state-paid student teaching. So when you reach the point of student teaching, you really can't hold a job at the same time you're doing student teaching, because you're going to school often at night, and then you're in student teaching during the day. So if you're one of those students that's putting themselves through college by working a job, that semester is a real financial barrier to you. So we could look at, could the state provide some stipends for teacher candidates as they're entering student teaching, and could we provide that across the board, or if we wanted to limit it some, could we means test it in some way? But it's an idea how we could alleviate that challenge. Another idea is to create alternative licensure opportunities, and particularly I'm talking about, could we look at different licensure exam pathways? So right now we have a major limiter with the praxis exam. Are there other ways that we could certify or qualify that a person should be granted a teaching license without having to go through the praxis exam? And then the last element of this, and then I look forward to more conversation with you, is incentivize and support high quality educators to remain in the profession. So we One short-term idea we had was to increase the funding for national board certification. Kentucky is a national leader when it comes to the number of nationally board certified teachers that we have. This is a wonderful program, an evidence-based program that is incredibly rigorous. We know that teachers who become national board certified, research has demonstrated they are more effective than teachers who are not. And the process of becoming national board certified, because it is an intense and rigorous process, it actually is an incredible professional development program for teachers. So we could look at providing greater stipends or supporting the stipends for becoming nationally board certified, or the cost that's associated with going through that process is a barrier for teachers as well, because so could we offset or have the state pay for the process of going through national board certification. Another idea we had was to provide a professional development wallet for teachers. You hear all the time that teachers feel like the professional development that they receive isn't targeted to them or isn't relevant to them. So could the state provide a wallet of professional development dollars for each teacher and empower them, give them agency to decide what professional development they want to go to and learn from, so that it's a sort of a consumer model. We put the teacher in charge of the professional development. Longer term, we could think about creating additional teacher pathways. One of the challenges that we have is that great teachers work for a few years and then they get swept into administration because they see that as the only viable career option for them. So could we look at different career pathways where we take great teachers and keep them connected to teaching, where they're mentoring and supporting other teachers, designing professional learning, working with specialized groups of students who need additional support. So there are different ideas around how we could increase compensation, create different career pathways other than just administration for teachers. And then finally, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot, make sure that we're continuing to provide a professional and livable wage for teachers in Kentucky. Our educators, our young people, when they're considering jobs, while our teachers are primarily driven for altruistic reasons and they want to help kids, they want to be part of the future, they're also rational economic actors. They look at what the cost of getting a college degree is versus the other options that are available when they leave with that college degree. This is a highly trained, highly skilled position, and so we have to always be attending to, are we offering a professional livable wage where we can recruit the best and brightest people in our society to become teachers and remain teachers? So thank you. In we appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about the state of teaching in Kentucky and give you some ideas on what legislators can do to support our educators. What you do with these proposals, these ideas, is ultimately up to you. But please know that we stand ready at the Kentucky Department of Education to provide any support or answer any questions that you have around fleshing out these proposals or ideas more fully. And I'd ask you to go back to where we started. Think back again about that great teacher that you had at the beginning. And what can we do as a state to make sure that more people like that come into the teaching profession and stay in the teaching profession? Because that's really the challenge that we have before us. Madam Chair, I'd just turn things back to you at the balance of my time. We're happy to answer any questions or hear any feedback that you and the members have.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that presentation. We do have some members with questions. Representative Bojanowski.
I sit in the front and I ask the first questions usually. So my question is on the pathways data slide, specifically on the Teach for America results. It's my understanding that our budget line item in 2019 was $500,000. And out of that $500,000, we ended up with only 4 teachers that stuck in and became certified. That's very concerning because we've increased the amount to $700,000.
So, Associate Commissioner Darnell can address that.
Well, you bring a valid point in terms of the leverage or success that this may be or may not be having in terms of Kentucky. But you can see a downward trend in terms of the gathering of teachers through that route into the field. So I would just caution in terms of conversations and looking at whether or not this is a valuable use of those resources and whether or not we are truly delivering in the mission of that particular pathway. So shared concern.
And I'll add to that to say that, as we said earlier, alternative pathways can provide talent that otherwise we wouldn't have. And Teach for America's, that's true with that route as well. But if we want to have a real impact on numbers at scale, if we need solutions at the size of the problem, we're going to have to do more than just focus on an answer like Teach for America or some of the other alternative pathways that we've had.
And if I may make a very brief comment.
Go ahead.
I'd also like to share with my colleagues, and I'll bring information and hopefully can meet with you. The Teach Kentucky program has a history of recruiting some of the best and brightest from out of state and bringing them into our STEM areas and needed areas. So I think that might be a way that we can spend the money and get a really good return. Thank you.
Thank you. We're fans of the Teach Kentucky model, and they have been effective at bringing in great teachers. So, and certainly very passionate. So, thank you for raising that up.
Representative Banta.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I like some of your ideas, and I would like to kick back some others. For example, I had a lot of people contact me this year that there were actually a couple schools with openings due to central office recruitment. So I just wonder, do you guys, ever talk to districts and say, hey, don't leave 2 positions open in schools in your district to bring them over to be consultants in central office? That's just a problem I see. And please let me continue just for a second. Has anybody studied the EPSB? Has anybody looked at the amount of credits that you require? For example, special ed, I'm told, is a 4-year degree that takes 5 years to get through. So is anybody looking at that saying, hey, we may need to modify this. We need to bring this back in. If I'm going to get a science degree, it's going to take me 5 years. I'm going to go work for Procter & Gamble. It's simple. Replacing student teachers with wages, maybe look at it and make subbing or something. When I was a principal, I had trouble holding back student teachers because there were teachers that were like, oh yeah, I just want my student teacher both semesters because it makes my life easy. So maybe we need to look at people who are subbing and let them make their own money while they're doing the work. And we all know subbing's as hard as any job that you can have. And also a great way to raise wages would be year-round school. That's one thing to look at. And I'm done. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Banta. I appreciate that you're adding to the list of ideas that we had. And that really was our goal, is to just get a conversation started and have you consider some of the things that we raised up, but also add in other ideas that are possible around, for example, the subbing idea. What you mentioned around a district pulling teachers out of buildings into central office positions and then creating a problem at the school level, that would be a bad HR practice in my professional opinion. So when I was a superintendent and even as a human resources director in a school district, it was our practice that the district office can wait, and you wait until you can fill the position at the school before you move the person up into the central office role. But that's not true everywhere, and so I think it's not something that we have any authority or regulatory power over. That's a local district determination. But I would agree it's a bad practice because it really shifts a problem to the school building that is unnecessary if the district could wait. And then on the question around, or the statement around special education certifications and the requirements for that, special education is a really tough job and it requires a lot of specialized training, as you know. So there are extensive requirements around becoming a special education teacher, and that's one of the barriers that we have, is what are the supports that we can provide for teacher candidates getting all of those requirements. I'm a supportive of alternative pathways, but I want to make sure that we don't lower the standard for what it means to be a teacher, especially for the very vulnerable population that are special education students.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Glass, it's good to see you again. And it's not likely that we're going to have a whole lot of contact with you this summer because I know how busy you are. And I've decided this interim session, we always focus as legislators a lot on the problems that we see in Kentucky, and certainly there are some. But I've decided to take a different approach this interim as I go through this interim session and begin to ask questions about what is Kentucky doing right. So that's going to be my focus, my objective this interim session. So I'm going to start with you, since education is my number one committee. What are we doing right here in Kentucky? You're the best person to ask. So what are we doing right here in education here in Kentucky in 2022?
That's a wonderful question and way to frame it. And I have the benefit of being a Kentuckian and growing up in Kentucky, but also having had the chance to work in several other states, so can bring that comparative lens. One of the things that I always appreciated growing up, and I know I romanticize it some, but the relationship that my community, Meade County, the school district had with the community, it was reciprocal. They cared about each other. The community would have done anything to make sure that the school succeeded, and the school did the same thing for people in the community. So that powerful sense of place, and that these are our schools and we're proud of them. And I see that in all the districts that I meet around the state, that same sense of powerful connection between community and school. So I think that's something Kentucky has done right, that we all are Green Waves or Cardinals or Wildcats or whatever it is, the high school mascot that we have. We identify with that, and that's an incredible sense of pride that the community has. So I think that's something that Kentucky has done right. A second thing that I'll mention is that I think Kentucky has worked hard to lift teaching up as a profession. I think one of the first questions that we should ask is teaching a profession or is it a job? And if we believe it is a profession, that not everyone can or should do it, that it requires extensive training, both clinical and classroom training, and a process of induction, and then a lifetime of work mastering the art and science of teaching. To me, that's a profession. And if we believe teaching is a profession, we have to approach supporting our teachers differently than if we think it's just a job. So I think that's something historically Kentucky has done. The last thing that I'll mention that I think Kentucky has done right. I go to all sorts of national events and talk to people about what's happening in other states, but people remember the Kentucky Education Reform Act and what this state tried to do with that reform. It's one of the most significant education reforms ever passed in the history of the United States. And so Kentucky is known for being able to do big things when it comes to education. In our listening tours around the state, when we asked Kentuckians what they wanted for the future of education, they remembered that. And they asked us to do big things again for their schools.
Thank you.
Representative Timney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, thank you for being here today. To piggyback off Representative Banta, student teaching, I remember my student teaching days when I signed up to be a student teacher. I had to sign a contract with my university saying I wouldn't work a part-time job that interfered. There's a fiscal demand there that we need to address. So I support that idea. I think we do need to address that in some capacity. I know the hours that I put in. I may have worked, if we're going to fess up our sins here, I may have worked a job or two for cash off the books in order to make ends meet during my student teaching career. I mean, I decorated classrooms. That was money coming out of my pocket. So I think that there's something definitely very valid there that we need to help with that. I'm going to say one word that all my good feelings are going to go out the window. Let's talk about the praxis for a minute. You want to talk about an obstacle preventing people from completing their degrees from being teachers. As a former principal, I actively recruited paraeducators who had a proven track record of having knowledge of how kids learn, what they need to learn, communication with their families, all the critical things that all teachers need to have. And they have it, all those boxes checked, except the praxis. Is there a way we can come up with some type of other standard to go by? Because I'm not about lowering standards. Our standards in the classroom need to be insanely high and need to always be that way. But if we can be creative, let's be innovative and think of a way for how we can navigate that piece for people who want to be in the classroom but can't because of an obstacle.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Timney. I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. the praxis exam serves as a gateway toward getting a certificate. And because teaching is a profession, like many other professions, you have exams at the beginning. But the challenge that we have with the praxis, similar to other standardized machine-scored tests, is it doesn't measure all of the things that are really important. I bet when I asked all of you to think about that great teacher that you had in your life or that great teacher that's working in your community, that they did well on the praxis wasn't on your list of what made them a great teacher. It was because they were able to connect some of the things that you told me. They brought a love of learning. They cared deeply about their students, and they were able to build connections with them. They were able to inspire and lift students up. We have a hard time measuring those things, but those dispositional aspects are just as important, maybe more important than what you can do on a standardized assessment.
And last but not least, definitely the teacher shortage piece. It is a national trend. I think we do need to get out in front of it. And if we can be successful at attracting teachers from other states and we need to definitely put. I remember recruiting teachers, calling other state universities, saying, "Do you have a list of unemployed teachers?" I was calling Tennessee, I was calling Indiana, I was calling Ohio, and there is a very small number there. And we definitely, if we're going to move Kentucky forward, we definitely need to be aggressive about pursuing those teachers. And last, for me, the good feelings. We talk about good teachers. Commissioner Glass, I'm not sure if you remember when I was doing my student teaching, you were at Woodford County High School, and I observed you as a teacher, and you were outstanding.
I'm sorry. I just want to say that.
Well, I think what's most important is to go on record about who's older between you and I, so I think we just proved that. In a different direction, Representative Bojanowski, I was actually her principal at Watterson Elementary School, and as a special education teacher, the lady is unrattleable. She is unrattleable, and what she did in the classroom was phenomenal. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Stewart. She was principal at Booker T, Washington, and her connection from her students to her staff to her community, second to none. So we have 3 really good ones in here. I'm definitely not on the list, but I can recognize good ones. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, you had 3 last, so you need to define the word last. I'm just trying to keep you in line because that's my job. Next, we have Representative Miller has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know what we're doing now. We have so many people in our schools that have 2 and 3 years of college that are working as teacher aides. I know of a couple, I have a couple that are doing this, and they are moving toward their certification. They would be people that have had the experience, and I know we've hit on this some today, but we have so many across the state. I know when I was principal, we have many of our teachers that had 2 years of college, and they were working as teacher aides and in the schools. I just wonder if you know or have found out, or if I know a lot of colleges, Bellarmine, for example, she's going to have her certification in November, and she's been working for 5, 6, 7 years or longer as a teacher aide. And I would say, knowing her and her friend, they'll probably be excellent teachers. And she's in elementary. So I wonder if we're pursuing this any, or if there is colleges that are helping them. She has everything's paid for. She is going to be a teacher probably second semester next year, and it's in Jefferson County Schools. So I was wondering if you've pursued that track, Kenny.
Thank you, Representative Miller. Dr. Darnell has some ideas around that. So,
well, Representative Miller, thanks for bringing that up. And just to go back to the last session, option 9 will be something that is going to be in motion very soon, and it is an opportunity for, I believe, what you are presenting here. in working to address individuals, especially that are in local communities where they live, and they provide tremendous resources in other roles, but could potentially become fully certified teachers. So I think we have a lot of potential in the future making to gather those individuals that wish to pursue that. I think districts are going to be entrepreneurial and seeking out these individuals too. So I'm personally excited about, yes, to give you a just a point blank answer. I think though the big picture is still focusing on the traditional students that are coming in. But, we certainly want to capture any opportunity to get the individual that has the dispositions and the skills in front of these students. So I absolutely believe we can help support districts in getting individuals, as you mentioned, into fully certified positions.
Senator Meredith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Glass. I certainly had the honor and privilege of representing Meade County within my district, and I concur with your statement about the quality of education that's received in that county. They truly are committed in large measure because the community is supportive of them. So I appreciate your presentation today. Can't disagree with any of the strategies that you have, but something that comes to mind to me is reflecting on our public education and our teachers we've had. I keep coming back to my most respected teacher has to be my wife. We taught for 32 years, and after I retired, I get to watch her firsthand, and seeing her get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, get at school at 6:30, teach all day, come home at 5 o'clock, because she also coached academic team, spend 2 hours on paperwork, and then time to go to bed and do it all over again. That's commitment, and that's a soldier. That's the people you want in education. And the reason I mention that is, again, all your strategy I can't disagree with, but I think a little something that may be lacking is a focus on what I would call the quality of work life. And I think this goes back to retention. After my wife retired, she couldn't wait to get through that 90-day lockout period because she wanted to go back and volunteer for her second grade pod that she taught in, because most of them are much younger teachers, and she said there's so much to do that she just wanted to volunteer to do their paperwork for them, and so they have a better quality of life. And I think that is a real issue that we overlooked. Bureaucracy seems to be endemic to almost every profession, and I wonder if we're giving any review at all to what I call the bureaucracy of the profession, and how we can maybe reduce the unnecessary paperwork and demands that teachers face, because I know that they're enormous. I think it would warrant a task force of teachers, maybe identify those things, but I think there may be some merit in that. Would you agree?
I do, yeah, and I'm really glad that you raised that. It's almost like such a big problem, we just stepped right over it, so I'm so glad that you mentioned it. My wife's a teacher too. My parents, my mom and dad, were both career educators here in Kentucky, and I saw all the hours that they put in as well. So I know that the problem that you're talking about is absolutely real. And the number of responsibilities, additional duties that we've added on to teachers that sap their energy, and the constriction of the ability to plan. If we look at planning time for teachers in Kentucky, planning time for teachers in the United States compared to some of the higher performing systems globally, our teachers have a fraction of the planning time that we see in some of those higher performing systems. So I think there's something to what you're saying, and could we look at how we could alleviate some of the pressures and working condition constraints that are on our teachers that may have a big impact. So I appreciate you raising that.
Thanks, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And gentlemen, thank you for the presentation. Dr. Glass, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I think the question is still very relevant to recruiting of new teachers. During my time here in the state legislature, I'm in year 8 now, it's the relationship with teachers has often been very contentious, and some years more than others. And I think there is often a perception within the teaching profession that Frankfort just doesn't care, the legislature doesn't care, and couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, year after year, I think we have shown through budgets, through other legislation, that there is an effort to improve the teaching profession in our state, to provide resources to support our teachers. From your perspective, what can we do as a legislature to help build that bridge back and get rid of the negative connotation that's there that perhaps Frankfurt doesn't care when we do? And it just seems like no matter what we do, budget after budget, 8 years, fully funding the pension system, what else do you feel like we can do to help build these bridges back? Because in the negative environment, that's not going to foster growth in the profession. We have got to change that within the Commonwealth, and it's perhaps more with the KEA than any other organization that represents teachers or that speaks for teachers. What do you feel like we could do?
That's an incredibly important question. Thank you for raising it. I think that educators or the legislators, I know that you feel like you've done some positive things with funding. You certainly did this past year in terms of funding SEEK and other additions to education and funding the pension. The challenge that you have as legislators and with the fiscal responsibilities that you have is you have to keep doing it because the pressures on schools, the inflationary pressures keep coming just like they do on everything else. So we have to keep increasing the funding so that our schools can keep up with inflation and the pressures that they're under from that perspective. And we want to continue to have the wages that we offer teachers both initially and ongoing at such a level that we attract talented people into teaching and that we retain them. At some level, it's a labor market problem. And if you have a shortage, it's also related to what you're willing to pay people. So if we look back and say, are we paying educators enough for all the things that they have to do, their total compensation package? If you're having shortages, it's one indication that we may not be addressing the salaries at a level that's sufficient. Certainly there's variation in that across the state. So I think the first thing I would say is that even though you've done some good things, especially this past session, we have to keep going back at this and thinking, how can we help our schools, our educators keep up with inflation? How can we make sure that we're offering an attractive, professional, and livable wage? Other things I think that have arisen are some of the political issues that have happened, some that were pandemic related, some that are in the hyper-partisan environment in which we live, that where educators feel like they're being asked to solve a lot of society's problems, or the finger of blame is pointed at them that they're the cause of society's problems. So I think that there's almost no way to insulate Kentucky from those national conversations, but I do think as legislators you can think carefully about how we engage in those conversations. I really appreciate Senator Wise on the whole critical race theory issue that we had last year. That was a cauldron and something that made educators in our state feel very defensive, very angry, that they were being targeted with a lot of the vitriol associated with that. And Senator Wise came forward and he tried to find a compromise where we could address some of the concerns that were raised around that and also not criminalize teaching or create punishments for teachers who are trying to do their jobs. So I think in that, those are my, I think, two initial responses to what I think is an incredibly important question. Even though there have been some positive steps made, we have to keep considering this because it's an ongoing budget issue that you have to keep going back and considering. And through the national conversations where education has become politicized, the legislature really has to consider, in our teachers in Kentucky, and our teachers that are in your communities, what is the language that we're using around them, and is this going to make them feel supported, valued, where we can keep attracting people into teaching and keep those great teachers in our communities?
Thank you, Dr. Glass. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Banta has an additional comment or question.
Yes, I was just wondering, I would be more than happy to work with other people and get some of the things done that you've requested. I was just wondering if you would be willing to look at EPSB standards, get some of those gifted teachers that got their 4-year degree in 5 years to do special ed and maybe eliminate some of the things for them to make it more attractive to go into that. And also, has anybody studied the praxis to even see if it still has some relevancy?
That's quite a question. Yeah. on the first element that you raised, the EPSB is it's a group of practicing teachers and university educators who are intended to sort of act as a decision-making body around what it means to be a teacher in the state. So Dr. Darnell is here. We'll certainly take back to that group your request to look at requirements around gifted and talented and special education, and can we make changes to that? So they have the power to do that. They have the authority to make those changes themselves. So we will take that back for their consideration. Certainly, as you did in the last session, as a legislature, you can also change the requirements through statute around what it takes to be a teacher. So that's a power that you have. So you have a couple of different routes that we could get at looking at what the requirements are around those two positions. And then related to the praxis, there is an abundance of opinions on it. Most of them are not favorable about how we have been using the praxis and looking for some alternatives. There are certainly challenges in terms of reliability and cost associated with performance-based models, but there are also challenges and problems with keep doing the same things that we've been doing. And so I'm interested in creating some new problems. Thank you.
That's all the questions that we have for today. Thank you very much for your presentation. But I would just encourage us when we're looking at differences and what we can do to ensure that we still have the standards and the qualities. I've had several teachers that have 10, 15 years say, I feel like that we're going backwards as far as what we're expecting of teachers. And if we want to be professional, then we have to have certain standards that we meet. So although I know that we're trying to meet the needs, I just wanted to also make sure that we keep the quality and the standards that are expected for the teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have reading instruction and methods and interventions. If you would please come to the table. Those presenters, introduce yourself for the record, and please proceed.
Alrighty. Let's see. All right. You're a PC person. Help me out here.
Oh, sorry.
Get that over.
What are you doing here?
Yeah. There we go. Take it to the top.
Please make sure that the microphone is on as well.
All right. Excuse us there. All right. Chairperson Huff, Chairperson Weiss, senators and representatives of the committee, thank you so much for your invitation to come and present to you today. My name is Dr. George Ruby. I'm the Executive Director of the Collaborative Center for Literacy Development and also an Associate Research Title Professor at the University of Kentucky. My specialty is educational neuroscience and literacy. With me today is Dr. Melinda Harmon. Dr. Harmon is the Director of Reading Recovery in Kentucky with us at CCLD and former President of Reading Recovery North America. We've been asked to present on reading instruction methods and interventions. And we're happy to do so. It's a complex set of issues, and I've provided you all with a brief.
Excuse me for just a moment.
Yes.
Could you move the microphone closer
Certainly.
to you, please?
Certainly.
Can't.
How's that? Is that working? Hello, hello.
Is the green light on?
Oh, there we go.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yes, my teenagers tell me this is a form of literacy, and this is very embarrassing. But thank you. We've been asked to present on reading instruction methods and interventions, and happy to do so. Before I do that, however, I would like to just remind you what CCLD is, what we do, and why we do it the way we do. And the short answer on that is because we are directed to do so by KRS 164-0207, which you all yourselves passed into law, and we are happy to do so. And we are happy to support whatever you do on behalf of improved literacy instruction in the Commonwealth. As you've heard, we have an issue with teacher shortages, and in supporting teachers' children to read, we note that now more than ever, Given those shortages and given the shift to a younger and less experienced teacher workforce and the increasing reliance by necessity on un- and undertrained personnel sometimes to fill the gap, that Kentucky's classroom instructors need guidance and training in how to teach children to read. And they need support for supporting children who struggle the most. We were created in 1998 by the Kentucky General Assembly. The situation is similar to today. There was an uncertainty about the quality of reading instruction in the schools. As noted, we're governed through KRS 164-0207, and we're mentioned in a number of other statutes related to literacy. We rely on the literacy faculty at all 8 of Kentucky's state universities, as well as some private university faculty and the good folks at the National Center for Families Learning in Louisville, and other partners as well. Our literacy faculty at the state universities in particular know the research, they know about practice, and they know how to be effective with teacher education. And so they are invaluable. But just as we have shortages in the classroom up in K through 12, we have some shortages in our teacher education programs at the state universities. Vacancies that have not been filled because of a lack of funding to do so. And this is harmful for the teacher education programs, and it's harmful for us at CCLD because we are lacking people that we used to rely upon. We're changing our staffing model for that reason, but this is a serious issue. It's been accruing for some time. I won't go through all the programs that we've assembled over the 24 years that we've been in existence, but some of them you know, the Kentucky Reading Project, our K through 5 teacher professional development vehicle, which has several variants, including KRP for Read to Achieve, KRP for Striving Readers, KRP for Kentucky Comprehensive Literacy. We have an Adolescent Literacy Project for 6 through 12. We have an Early Language and Literacy Project for pre-K and family and community literacy. And we also have done a lot of groundwork there, and I thank Keith Lyons in particular for his great work in getting Kentucky Imagination Library going over several years with some funding from the governor's office, and it's now in the hands, of course, of the Kentucky Department of Libraries and Archives, which is an ideal place for it, and we, of course, are willing to support that as well. This is a map of our coverage just for the 2021 year. As you can see, most counties have been served with 2 or 3 groups covered. For any 4-year period, every county in the Commonwealth gets covered. In spite of all of those programs and the catalog of expectations in 1640207, what we do boils down to 3 things in particular. We provide high-quality teacher professional development and interventionist trainings by qualified state and private university faculty to improve instruction of students' reading and writing and their language development, for communication, for thought, and for learning. We also provide advisory services to stakeholders across the Commonwealth, teachers, schools, districts, parents. And what we do with a focus on what qualifies as evidence-based, as per the regulations in 1640207. I won't go into our model, but it's a 10-month PD cycle. It starts with a needs survey where we ask the teachers to tell us what they know best, what they know least well, and what they think they need to know more about to do well with their teachers. I should say that these are not first-year teachers. We're dealing with people whom, on average, are 7 to 8 year seniority. We have some that are over 20 year. But they come to us, and they come to us voluntarily. We rarely do mandated PD, although we have. But they come to us voluntarily and eagerly because they know that our focus will be on the concerns that they feel they need to address. All PD, and there's much mandated PD from the schools, from the districts, if there's grant money from the state, and from the program providers that they buy into. That PD always provides a review of the foundations, and that's important. And it hopefully is providing some newer strategies for them to use to enrich their repertoire of instructional approaches. But we also develop a better awareness of the research so that they understand why the things that we are asking them to do are more effective than you would know otherwise. And we are also strengthening their instructional problem-solving abilities so that they can continue through what some call teacher action research, which we call a literacy action plan, to develop new curricular materials to augment those that are required. And then they all come together in April for a statewide share fair, 600 or so teachers sharing the work that they've done, how they tweaked it to make it work better, listening to one another. It's very empowering and it's very encouraging. And it's the sort of professionalization that is recommended by folks like Linda Darling Hammond at Stanford and her colleagues. Interestingly, she started her work in the late 90s when we were started, and both of us started with the work that came out of the Office of Educational Research and Reform, a collaboration between UK and the University of Louisville, funded by the state legislature. Evidence-based methods are those that meet a federal definition. This is how it's defined in Kentucky regulatory statute. There are 3 tiers of evidence: strong, moderate, and promising, and I won't go into the wonky details about how these different designs warrant that sort of distinction. But this is what the kind of evidence that allows us to say with a fair degree of probability what will work with certain kinds of students under certain conditions. Not all the time, but with a much greater degree of probability than just putting a finger to the wind and taking a guess. There's also a 4th category, and this is not really tier 4, although some call it that. It's that, there's a lot that we do that we feel is effective that we do not have evidence-based research on. And as you all know, an absence of evidence is not evidence of an absence. Just because many districts choose to use programs that are not listed in the Institute of Educational Sciences What Works Clearinghouse does not mean that those programs don't work. It just means we don't have the evidence to say that they do. And our regulatory statutes restrict us from being able to recommend for that. So here's just some examples of some research. I shared this with the Finance Committee last summer. These are measures on the end-of-year 5th grade K-Prep exam for reading. The bars there, the color-coded bars, are distinguished, proficient, apprentice, and novice level readers. And we went back and looked to see if at any time during their 6 years of elementary school, from kindergarten all the way up to 5th grade, if they had ever had a Kentucky Reading Project trained teacher. And as you can see, the bottom group of bars are students that never did. The middle group of bars are students that had had 1 in 6 years. And the top bars are those that had 2 in 6 years. And what this clearly shows is that if they'd had 1 or more KRP-trained teacher, they were significantly more likely to score distinguished, significantly less likely to score novice. And that's the kind of shift that we'd like to see. And the beauty of it is the sustainability of this effect, because that's where you get your bang for your buck. You pay for it 1 year, and it continues to echo through the teacher's professional advance and the student's professional advance. Here are some data from the Read to Achieve program. Now, Read to Achieve is not a CCLD project. It's it's a state General Assembly constructed program, and it is handled by the Kentucky Department of Education. But we do have some work in this. We do provide a lot of +1 classroom teacher professional development, and we also have supported all of the evidence-based methods or programs that are used in this. So you have these 2 factors going: the teacher intervention, reading intervention for kids who are struggling, and the professional development for the regular classroom teachers. And as you can see, the gray bars are Read to Achieve students, the orange bars are regular students, or average students, and as you can see at the beginning of every year, well, this is 2019-2020, in the fall, there's a significant difference between how well the Read to Achieve students do and the average students. Of course, you expect that. That's why these kids are in Read to Achieve. But by winter of 2020, they have closed the gap. And that's what you want to see, closing of the achievement gap. This tells you three things. It tells you that there's a gap. It tells you that that gap can be closed if you have qualified and well-trained interventionists and qualified and well-trained classroom teachers. And it also shows you there's a summer slide going on. So that reminds you that there are out-of-school effects that are having an impact on this. Finally, it also shows you that a community effort within a school to advance literacy has carryover effects, because the Read to Achieve program is K through 3, and you see effects in 4th and 5th grade. So I'll just rush ahead. These are our National Assessment of Educational Progress 4th grade scores for Kentucky, 1992 to 2019. That black line is the U.S. average. The blue line is Kentucky's 4th grade average. The red line, just by way of comparison, is Tennessee's average. Every year since 1998, we have been significantly above the national average, and this is remarkable because there's a strong correlation between reading achievement by students and socioeconomic status. And we're the 5th poorest state in the union, and we are outpacing most other states. We go up and down, and we came down from 2015 to 2019, and that's unfortunate, but I wouldn't panic just yet. You want to use the U.S. average as the baseline. Here's another way to see the same thing. Why was that drop? I'm afraid to say most of it was because of a particular unfortunate issue. If you look at the urban cohort study by NAEP from 2015 to 2019, you see there at the bottom of the list, Jefferson County, a drop of 8 points. 8 points in 2 testing cycles? That is terrifying. It's 6 points relative to the national mean. Now, you only see that in the 4th grade scores in JCPS. You don't see it in the 8th grade reading scores. You don't see it with the math scores. You don't see this kind of drop. So it wasn't anything global. It was something specific to early reading. That needs to be investigated and ought to be looked into. And if you do, you begin to see correlations. Now, correlations are not causation, but you'll find that some of the things that were going on in Jefferson were also going on in Baltimore, Tampa, Boston, Houston, Chicago. All of these school districts also were advancing similar programs. Then you look at the top of the list, remarkable improvements, 9-point and 7-point over the national mean by San Diego and Fresno. High poverty, high English language learner, minority-majority districts that are totally beating the odds. They did some things that are different. Now, this is just correlation, but again, if you look over decades, you'll see the correlation over and over again. You see it with reading first. You see it at the district level. You see it at state levels. So while we want to do what's best, history can somewhat be our guide. This is not even qualified as Tier 3 evidence basis, but it points the direction as to what was most probably going to be effective and what is not. So that leaves me to the brief that it's in your packet. It very quickly looks at, there's your 5 pillars of reading right there: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. But it reminds you that these are distinguishable by decoding skills and language comprehension ability. And this is called the simple view of reading, dates back to 1986. But what it states is that reading is measured on a reading comprehension test is the product of a student's decoding skills and their language comprehension ability. And what that means is both decoding skills and language comprehension ability have to be strong to do well on that end of year, 3rd grade and on test. Neither one is sufficient by itself. In the 80s, we had the whole language people who wanted to push for meaning making over decoding, and decoding would develop naturally. Well, yeah, we learn with our brain. Everything we learn naturally. It's a biological process. But we learn from our experiences, and our experiences in formal, structured educational environments in classrooms determine what we learn best. Now there are folks who turn it the other way around. They say we have to focus on decoding. Language is something you'll learn naturally. Again, yeah, well, you get rather unfortunate results. There are hierarchical linear model equations. These kind of factor analysis work goes back to the 1940s. This is from 2015. It shows you, this is second grade level, it shows you that language and decoding predict that reading comprehension test. We have neuroscience research that indicates areas of the brain where these processes are located, and this is my area. We also know the fascicular pathways that connect these, and we have a very good understanding of what's going on in brains as they learn to read. And we also know what's happening when children are struggling with learning to read. Here again, this is the second graders. They've been measured on fluency, accuracy, on oral language comprehension, and some have trouble with one, some two, some three of these factors. 40% here are struggling with accuracy. 70% are struggling with fluency. 60% are struggling with language. Each of those issues requires different sort of intervention. There are no one-size-fits-all silver bullet solutions. So I commend this to you, and I would love any feedback you can get. It's not hard to read. It's 10 pages, but it's a skeleton key outline. Some illustrations is just the first page that provides you a couple paragraphs of background, and the rest. If to look it over, and I would love your feedback. I put this together just for you all, and I sent it out to some scholars across the nation to get their feedback, and they are just delighted. They think this is great, and they've asked if they can use this. And I said, okay, well, it's a start. We need work on it. We need work from our classroom instructors. We need work from our administrators. We need work from our legislators. So I'd love to hear more about that. So now I turn this over to Dr. Harmon in Reading Recovery.
And you're going to push the button
Yes,
for
sure.
me. Thank you. Good morning. Actually, good afternoon now. My name is Dr. Lindy Harmon. I'm the trainer and director of the Reading Recovery Center at CCLD. Reading Recovery is a one-on-one early reading intervention for first grade children experiencing difficulty in learning to read. Reading Recovery has a strong evidence base. The SREB's Ready to Read report outlined 4 recommendations for improving literacy to their member states. Recommendation number 2 focused on providing evidence-based early interventions for children who struggle with learning to read. They go on to cite Reading Recovery as one of the most well-researched and most effective interventions available. In the What Works Clearinghouse report, of the 228 programs reviewed for beginning reading, Reading Recovery shows positive effects across all 4 domains of reading and remains as the only intervention to do so to date. The evidence for ESSA review rated Reading Recovery as having strong evidence and solid outcomes. Reading Recovery has also been recognized as an effective teacher PD model by the Learning Policy Institute. It was cited as the only model that met all 7 of the elements of effective teacher PD. So Reading Recovery is both an early reading intervention model for children and a professional learning model for in-service teachers. You can go ahead. The goal of Reading Recovery is to reduce the number of first grade students who have extreme difficulty learning to read and write, and to reduce the long-term cost of these learners to education systems. For children, the goal is to develop effective reading and writing skills and strategies so that they can make faster than average progress, catch up with their peers, and continue to learn successfully in their first grade classroom. Because each child arrives with different strengths and needs, a range of teaching procedures are needed. This calls for teacher knowledge and expertise to change the trajectory of learning for each child. All Reading Recovery professionals receive a full year of graduate level education, followed by an ongoing professional development throughout their years in Reading Recovery. This map represents where we are in Kentucky. My role as a Reading Recovery trainer is to train teacher leaders in the clinical procedures of Reading Recovery and provide leadership experiences in working with adult learners. These teacher leaders then provide training and ongoing professional development to teachers in their regions, schools, and districts. Our teachers select the 4 first grade children who score the lowest on a diagnostic assessment of early literacy achievement and work one-on-one for 30 minutes each day until the child reaches the average reading levels of their classroom. That's about 30 to 50 hours of instruction. in about 2 to 2.5 hours a day. The remainder of the teacher's day is spent teaching primary grade children in small reading groups. Each teacher can reach about 8 to 10 children in individual lessons each day or each year, along with about 25 to 30 or more additional children in small groups daily. Our teacher leaders are also including classroom teachers, special education teachers, and English language teachers in our professional learning experiences. During the pandemic, we began our own professional learning around learning modules focused on the cognitive skills and processes for reading and writing. Teacher leaders are sharing these learning experiences as our schools return to normal operation. 7 of those 10 professional learning modules focus on early decoding skills, including alphabet, early and advanced phonemic awareness and phonics, cumulative decoding, working with syllables and word parts, rhyming for decoding, and spelling and orthography. I brought folders for you today because I was afraid you wouldn't get the electronic documents, and you did not. So you should have a folder like this. In that folder on the left side are all of the evidence reports that I included in my talk today. On the right side are a copy of the site map and a chart with the current numbers across the state, teachers, teacher leaders, schools, and districts. I've also included on the right-hand side of your packet an assessment packet for a typical student entering and exiting reading recovery. I wanted you to see the growth and change over time that so many of our children experienced during this intervention. On the final 3 pages of that packet, I also wanted you to see how many of our children enter with confusions about how to look at print, work with letters, sounds, and words. In Kentucky this year, we had more children like this than ever before. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We do have some questions. Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is for Dr. Ruby. In an email you sent in last August to me, you stated that you'd never tried to tie the reading recovery scores to the end of the 3rd grade K-Prep, as the objective is to see if reading recovery kids catch up with their peers by the end of 1st grade. And if so, then you said they're home free. So from there forward, you said that they would be among the average or general classroom students. I wasn't satisfied with that response for longitudinal data, so I did an open records request with both JCPS and KDE on longitudinal K-Prep results for students who participated in reading recovery in 1st grade. And what I found is rather concerning. So the data in JCPS, kids who were in reading recovery, 70.9% of the students scored novice on their K-Prep. And the data I got from KDE, 67.5% of students who did reading recovery in 1st grade scored novice. And as I was pondering that data, then in April, the study came out, which was a major hit to the credibility of reading recovery, a national study presented at the ERA conference in April on 9,000 students from more than 700 schools, which found that students who participated in reading recovery scored lower on their 3rd grade reading tests than students of a similar ability who did not do reading recovery. I dug in as much as I could through public information to try to estimate how much our reading recovery teachers cost us in training and salaries. And I came up with a figure of at least $30 million in taxpayer dollars a year. I don't think that the number of students who score novice on K-Prep after doing reading recovery in 1st grade indicate that those students are home free. Spending $30 million for teachers to implement a program that may lead to them demonstrating lower accountability scores is not a fiscally conservative decision for this body. And I'm frustrated that I had to do an open records request to get longitudinal data for a program that is such a significant financial commitment by the state. You stated in your slides today that the goal of reading recovery is to reduce the long-term cost of these learners to education systems. But these results indicate that this is not happening. Maury Clay, founder of Reading Recovery, stated that undue attention to the detail of letters can block the child's ability to use his language knowledge and the meaning of the text as part of his information base for decision making. Perhaps it's time to provide children direct instruction in phonemic awareness and letter sounds so they can learn systematically and explicitly to decode words. KRS 164.0207 directs the CCLD to offer professional development in research-based reading programs, more than one program. What program can you recommend as an alternative to reading recovery?
Well, the two that we have supported because they are evidence-based and are therefore an option that those who apply for a Read to Achieve grant, for instance, with KDE, that we've supported, is early intervention in reading. In fact, I got Barbara Taylor, who designed that herself, to come out of retirement in Montana and come and give us the teachers here in the Commonwealth PD. And the other is leveraged literacy intervention. There are some others. I think there's one other option, but I only know of one district that uses it. And I don't think it's been used in a couple of years. So we do support others. The inclusion of reading recovery in CCLD began back in 1999. Reading recovery was funded by the state legislature in 97, the year before CCLD was created. So 2 years later, it was decided that they should be moved into CCLD because that would just, for administrative purposes, it would be efficient. And also ensure a continuation of funding. So that was the commitment that was made at that time. Now, let me point out, I like your idea of longitudinal data, but to do longitudinal data, you have to follow the same thing across years. What is being measured on a K-PRAP test at the end of third grade is not the same thing that's being measured on Maury Clay's screening instrument for first grade. I showed you that longitudinal equation model, and I noted, although I did this very quickly, and I apologize, that the weightings of language comprehension and decoding as predictors of the comprehension test change across years. Decoding and comprehension are both very important predictors of how the kids will do on, say, a MAP test in kindergarten, first grade, or second grade. But by third grade, decoding skills, decoding fluency ceases to be significantly predictive of the test. And the reason for that isn't because decoding is unimportant, it's because most students have mastered decoding to ceiling effects, and to get a correlation between test scores, which tend to follow a sort of a bell curve distribution, and decoding scores, and the decoding scores by third grade and beyond sort of all skew to the hard right. And so there's no correlation there, and that's what's meant by prediction. They're not predicting the future, they're simply predicting a correlation at a given point in time. So if you look to that end of year third grade test, there's much more weight to language skills. Now, what Reading First addresses is primarily decoding skills. Now, that's not all it addresses, and I'll let Dr. Harmon follow up on this. So it's kind of like you're comparing apples and oranges there with two different curriculums, first grade and third grade, by end of third grade particularly, and two different assessments that are assessing really different things and are weighted differently.
Would you like me to follow up?
We have two more questions that
Okay.
want to be asked, so we'll need to move ahead. Go ahead with your question, Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate you all being here today. I don't think it's any secret to anybody in this room that I've had a great interest in early literacy in Kentucky and what we can do to improve it. So every chance I've gotten for the last 4 or 5 years, I've talked to education leaders across the state, across this country. At SREB a few years ago, I just happened to sit at the same table at breakfast with the Commissioner of Education in Mississippi, and we were talking about this issue, and I discussed reading recovery. Her comment to me was, it's not cost effective for the number of students who are impacted. That's one comment that I've heard. I've had other people make similar comments, and I know there seems to be a debate out there over reading recovery across the country. Recently, I think Representative Bojanowski referenced a study. There was an NPR article. I'm sure you've read it intensively. That came out. It was done by a Mr. May, who's director of the Center for Research in Education and Social Policy at the University of Delaware, and he said he was even surprised at the outcome, the results of the study, and I'll make sure staff emails this article to all the members. And what it found was, I don't think there's any doubt that from the studies that students in first grade have gains. They have improvements. But the question is by the time they're leaving third grade, they're getting ready to go into fourth grade where comprehension is so essential. And that seems to be the disconnect that we have. That in their study, they showed that students who in the third grade had gone down with their counterparts. There have been several schools across the country who have dropped reading recovery. I think one of the most significant is the Columbus, Ohio district. I mention that because I believe I'm correct that reading recovery actually started at Ohio State. And Columbus was the first district to do that. And I just want to read a comment from Leslie Kelly, who's the executive director at the Columbus School of Teaching and Learning, and said the decision to drop reading recovery is part of a larger effort to bring the science of reading to the district. She said she and her colleagues realized that their approach to reading restriction, including reading recovery, did not align well with the science. And her advice to districts is do your research. Make sure that it's evidence-based. So that leads me to my question, and it goes back to Representative Bojanowski's question to you. Mm-hmm. What can we do in Kentucky? What kind of research can we do to document? Because we're talking about a very precious commodity. Mm-hmm. That's the future of our children.
That's right.
And what can we do to document and get the right data to make sure that the programs that we're offering, that we're implementing in the state, are effective in helping them to learn to read?
Mm-hmm. Well, sir, I just want to make 3 points. The first is, according to a lot of statistical analyses that have been done, cognitive psychology and cognitive educational psychology, such as the sorts of inferential statistics that Dr. May used in that study, which, by the way, is not a peer-reviewed published study. It was a working paper that was presented at an education conference just earlier this year. The reason he was surprised by the outcome is because he's done research on reading recovery before. He did an analysis with over, 7,666 students, pair-matched, reading recovery and non-reading recovery. And the non-reading recovery students at the end of the first grade were at 17th percentile, but the reading recovery had risen to 36th percentile. And you may not realize this, but when you look at the normal distribution of variance, because there's so many students crammed into the top there, it's a lot harder to get from the tails towards that center than to cross over the center. So the 19-point advance for the reading recovery students is a lot more impressive than if you were to go another 19 points to the 54th percentile. All right, But the study he did, and I think it was fifth grade that he was looking at, not third grade. But again, that test is it's measuring different things. It's G-weighted, and we don't, which means that G is for Spearman's correlate for general intelligence, and the reliability of that is insufficient in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2. So that's why we don't have those kinds of end-of-year tests at that grade level. But I'm right with you. The evidence base is necessary, and it would be highly useful. We just got done with, we were participating in it, but it was actually done by Ohio State University, the I3 study, and I know Dr. Harmon can speak to that.
Yes, and the growth rate for the children in the I3 study who participated in reading recovery over a 5-month period was 131% of the national average. And this study was conducted by the same person who presented the study in this spring. Now, that study is not a published, peer-reviewed research study. He's just completed the study and took it to the ERA conference. At that same conference, there was a study that was peer-reviewed and published out of the United Kingdom in England, and it presented at the same conference, found positive results for students in England through age 16. And so what I would say to you is May's study in the spring is one study. And so we need to get beyond just one study. There's also meta-analyses where they combined all of the statistics from multiple studies. And the last one that was done on reading recovery was done in 2016. And it says, all of these recent meta-analyses appear to focus on the impacts of instructional interventions that target the needs of struggling readers, particularly during the early years. And one of these analyses considered 16 studies that had evaluated the effectiveness of reading recovery. And that intervention was found repeatedly to be effective at what its intended goal is. So many people over the years have complained they want reading recovery to add certain components to the lesson framework, and they want us to address different things. And what I said in my presentation is all of these children come in individually with different confusions. And so we have to prepare our teachers through training and professional development to use those procedures flexibly with every single individual child. It's an individual intervention. And so we do not teach all kids exactly the same because we don't believe that all kids learn exactly the same. And so we do whatever it takes to get these kids on target and back in the classroom as quickly as they can so they can continue to benefit from classroom instruction. They're below the class average in first grade. Those average first graders are not waiting for them to catch up. So they have to make twice the progress in half the time in order to catch up with their peers.
So to take it back around, when I said that after reading recovery, they're good to go, I meant in terms of the skills that are addressed in reading recovery. Future skills may be a challenge. You want to ask yourself, why are some students lagging behind in their development? Some come to school first day of kindergarten that are a little further behind. Some are further ahead. Some are faster, quicker learners. Some are a little slower. That's just natural, normal human variation. That's not failure. While I appreciate your concern about that, and the research shows quite clearly phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency are crucially important in the early elementary grades and thereafter, but you establish them in the early elementary grades because most students master them to sufficiency by about 18 months, which is 2 full school years of instruction. But those who lag behind from the start have a tough time keeping up. And it may be because we're looking at disproportionately, there are more slower learners, let us say. And if that's the case, then you're going to see those effects at 3rd grade and in 5th grade. But it's not because of their decoding skills. It's because of the general effect, the Spearman's G.
Thank you. And our final question goes to Senator West.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation today. I have a few questions that revolve around, I believe it's your slide 7, where you kind of lay out the KRS and you lay out, where you receive your funding, CCLD funding. Does CCLD receive funding or monies from reading recovery itself?
No. So
you receive no funding or monies directly from reading recovery?
No.
The organization, okay. In KRS 164-0207 that's referenced, more or less where the legislature sets up CCLD. In the statute, it says that you are to make available professional development for educators in reliable, replicable, research-based reading programs. And then in 1A, it says that you're basically to set up a clearinghouse of this information. has Kentucky, have we relied too much on reading recovery? And is reading recovery like the main tool in the clearinghouse that is pushed by CCLD? And in light of some of this new information, should it be opened up a little bit, do you think?
Well, we have principled disagreements on that, but I should say that there's a certain autonomy to reading recovery because it was placed into CCLD fully formed, right, and so it was already running, and so we haven't interfered with that. But now that in fact, what CCLD does is provide funding for the teacher leaders. And so the other funding, Lindy will have to explain how that works. But so there's that autonomy there. Contrary to what was said on social media last week, I am not an advocate of reading recovery. I am an admirer of the evidence base that they've established. So there's, you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. And in research, you can have your own interpretations, but you can't have your own data. And so that is pretty hard to say no to. But there are other evidence-based methods as well. And when we've been consulted, we've always said, let 1,000 flowers bloom, or whatever the phrase is, because as I say, there are districts that are happy with the program they're using. It may not be evidence-based, but common sense would suggest that if they're happy, it seems to be working, they don't have any issues with it, then why interfere? And we don't, because there's local control of the schools and they can make that determination. But what they cannot do is apply successfully for Read to Achieve monies, as you know.
Just one quick follow-up, Madam Chair. Specifically to your slide that showed Jefferson County. I don't think it's any secret we have a real problem in Jefferson County with early literacy, among other things. Reading recovery is available in Jefferson County, right? And so if reading recovery is available there, why do you think it's not working there? And keep in mind that chart was showing the change in scores between 2015 and 2019. So whatever problems were there are still there, but there's for some reason this startling drop. But what was not there, what was taken out, was the Kentucky Reading Project, which is a K through 5 program that's been running since 1998. We had a KRP through the University of Louisville, but they were doing it in the surrounding districts. And some teachers from JCPS actually would go out and attend those in addition to what they were required to attend at JCPS. JCPS had a exclusive contract with Bellarmine University, $1 million a year. I think it cost them. I didn't mention the fact that what we offer the teachers is free. All right, it's free to their schools, it's free to their districts. We're using those monies that you provide us to provide that PD. But they wanted to go this route instead, and Bob Cooter there, who became dean, and David Page and the whole gang there. I respect these people as fellow literacy scholars. But even when they were telling me about what they were going to do and they were all excited, I said, well, didn't you try something like that in Memphis when Bob was in Memphis? And that didn't work then. And in Houston? And so there's certain things that, as I just say, decoding is tremendously important, right? There is no question that programs that have a phonics component work significantly better than those that don't. But when you compare programs, there's no significant difference between the effect on how you teach phonics, provided you teach phonics, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can use different methods to teach effectively, and most teachers do. So, as you say, it's a complex issue, and I think we need more study on what was going on there at that time, because I wouldn't want to guess. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Members, thank you for your indulgence. We are 20 minutes over, so we are adjourned.